Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was taken by Yoda and trained to become a Jedi Knight. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Renvar system, on the bridge of the usurper. The battle above planet raged on as the first separatist fleet had arrived to drive back the Republic forces, and at the head of this counterattack was General Grievous, and he was not going to take any prisoners. Focus fire on their center, break through their line and have our destroyers encircle the remaining fleet. All munificent frigates remain on standby, Grievous ordered as he narrowed his eyes. Even though he was definitely a greater asset on land, he was still the supreme commander of the droid armies, and thus had to be a competent naval commander as well. Count Dooku had the situation on the ground under control anyways. He would quickly crush this paltry, scattered fleet, and hopefully he would get the chance to take to the surface and slay some Jedi. Get me in contact with the 11th Fleet's commander. I need to coordinate our strategy with her, immediately. Grievous was hoping for a quick resolution to the battle above. He heard that blonde brat from destined was leading the Republic on the surface, and he wanted to thank him for his new arm personally. On board the Sovereignty. As soon as he saw the large droid fleet exit hyperspace, Allender had ordered his ships to turn hard to port. It had put them in a poor position against the 11th Fleet, but he doubted their commander would be able to exploit this brief moment of weakness, and there was a much more pressing matter to deal with now. He too had recognized the Confederate First Fleet, which had proven to be a major threat to any Republic ships foolish enough to engage them. The situation of the battle had left much of the fleet spread out, and with no solid central line. They were bait. Those clever bastards. Allender thought. It was rather odd how the remaining ships of the 11th Fleet were trying to avoid battle, and trying to retreat in all directions. Considering the way the battle had went, they looked to be retreating and trying to draw him away to prevent further damage to their larger ships. He believed he had seen through their strategy, and had pursued their main fleet instead of the larger ships, inflicting great damage on the 11th Fleet. It seemed that it was all just a ploy to spread them thin before the main force arrived. He frowned at that. If that was the case, then he had drastically underestimated the 11th Second's commander. No, it would be more accurate to say that their commander had been showing them a false weakness. Have our fighters redirected to screen the front. Do not allow the separatist fighters and bombers through. Allender ordered. His forces were more concentrated and the closest to the separatist fleet. Even though their numbers had started dwindling, his pilots were far superior to droids. They should be able to handle a few more vulture droids. What about the fleet, sir? An officer questioned as Allender hummed at that. He looked around, observing the others as their fleets moved around, quickly reorganizing themselves to face the new threat. Jess and Tarkin had been on the front lines, fighting the initial battle 11th Separatist fleet. However, with the arrival of Grievous and the First Fleet, they would have no time to bring their ships around, and the 11th Fleet was beginning to reform from their feigned scatter. This also meant that the ground forces from here on out would have little to no support from above. Contact Zells, have his fleet full reverse and form up our right flank. He is to launch all fighters and have them engage the First Fleet immediately. Jess and Tarkin will have to stay on defense against the 11th Fleet. Have them make sure they don't regroup and surround us. Allender ordered. Zells was closer to him than anyone aside from Yularen, who was now slightly ahead of him on his left, and as such, he could quickly form up on his right, and form a decent defense line. What about Admiral Ross and the new Victory-class cruisers? The officer questioned again as Allender sighed. He wished he had human officers that could think for themselves, unlike these garden variety Navy clones. Hell, he'd even take one of the Naruto's clones from the 497th. They were good men with good heads and enough sense to think straight. Perhaps Naruto could teach the officers to be more independent like his ground troops sometime. Ross was too much of a prideful lone wolf to talk tactics with his fellow officers. Even Naruto's orders seldom reached the ears of Admiral Ross. Ross always was one to carry out his own independent operations. Turning his attention to the battlefield ahead, the droid fleet was ruthless, trying to push past the Republic fleet by using overwhelming superiority of droid fighters. One of Obi-Wan's Venators had begun to break apart from the First Fleet's rapid advance, so Weil made a snap decision. Let him be. He knows what to do. I have faith in his abilities. He replied, hoping it was the right call to let Ross run free in a battle like this. The officer nodded and relayed the message. They may have numbers, but we have superior pilots and those new warships. I only hope that our support vessels can make a formidable defense line along with the starfighters. Allender snarled through his teeth as another Venator, this time one of his own, exploded violently. Either the fuel injectors or the munitions depot had suffered a lucky turbo laser hit. This would not be an easy battle. On board the spearhead. Bring the ships around at once. Ross ordered in a hurry. His fleet was positioned to face the planet, and while they had expected a counterattack, Ross had only expected it to be roughly a fifth of this size. It made no sense. Renvar was nothing. It was just useless frozen rock in their path. It had no strategic value. No, they created its strategic value. Renvar was an unlosable gambit. By fortifying the planet and holding a sizable fleet in orbit here, they planned to launch a counter-offensive and cut off any Republic forces that pushed further in. We didn't, so now we're fighting the same battle that would have been fought on a more valuable planet like Felucia on a useless rock like Renvar, he thought as he narrowed his eyes. The Separatists had chosen the fields they wanted to fight on and exploited the situation well. Sir, General Kenobi just lost a Venator. An officer shouted hastily before another reported Allender had lost one of his as well. Ross's fist tightened. The Separatist attack, while simple, was a ruthless barrage towards their center line that had cut through Obi-Wan's poorly positioned fleet. The Rakusan destroyers were high-speed vessels that excelled at bypassing Republic forces. The left flank of the Republic lines was getting pushed back further and further, until Zels had filled in the gap, likely under Allender's orders. The right was hold on, and the center was doing excellent in hold back the enemy. That was what Ross had been waiting for. If Ross was being given full reign to do as he pleased, then he was going to make damn good use of it. Have all ships drop to position 5-0, directly below the center. Dorsal batteries to full power and focus fire on those frigates. Their armor should be no match for heavy guns. Ross ordered as the fleet began to carry out his order. By positioning his flotilla directly below Allender's, he would be able to use all of his heavy batteries positioned on top of Victory. The Star Destroyers moved like clockwork. Ross opted to only use human officers, old comrades from his days as a pirate hunter and relegated clones to operating the gun batteries. It wasn't that he had a problem with clones, he simply knew these men and was able to utilize them well. Sir, we are in position. An officer shouted as Ross allowed a smirk on his face. Fire first salvo. Dreadnought cruisers are to follow up by barrage of ion cannons to disable what survives. Ross ordered as the batteries moved into position before unleashing a torrent of heavy fire from below. 4 of the Separatist frigates were directly hit, causing explosions to ripple through their center before exploding and splitting in two. As the Separatists began to react to this new threat, most of the ships had their systems quickly disabled as the ion barrage did its work. Sir, enemy destroyers are jumping out of hyperspace and are moving into position behind us. Ross blinked at that as he looked straight on and frowned. It seems that the Separatists loved holding small vessels in reserve. A good strategy considering how fragile most of their fleet was. However, Separatists' destroyers were anything but fragile. These ones seemed to be under the banner of the 11th Fleet, however. Ross decided to move his ships forward and let Jess and Tarkin deal with the new ships. On board the Purility, Jess was doing whatever it took to prevent the 11th Fleet from breaking through her line. She had at first managed to push back some of the smaller Separatist ships back quite a bit, but the feigned retreat of their capital ships had allowed them to come back with a vengeance, using aggressive tactics to push past her fleet and flank Wile's rear. She wasn't about to let that happen, and quickly ordered her fleet on a small and spread retreat towards the planet. Captain Stroh, the Starlight is severely damaged. The clone shouted, pointing at a Venator that was critically damaged, most likely beyond repair. She gritted her teeth at that. Evacuate at once, she ordered. The Venator might be beyond saving, but the crew wasn't, and hell if she would let them die. Turning her attention straight ahead, she narrowed her eyes towards the Providence cruiser that Jess had pinned as being the 11 Seconds command ship. But there was one obstacle in her way to launching an assault on the command craft. Barring straight down at her was a Lucrehulk, and it seemed to be far more heavily armed than the ones earlier in the war, and would be nearly impossible to take down alone. That was when she formed a plan. Do we have any functional droids on board the Starlight? She questioned her officers. We might have a few. An officer responded as Jess nodded and quickly began to explain her plan. With the ship evacuated, the Separatists would quickly ignore it and go for targets that were still fighting. It was a common droid tactic. After all, why waste time on an abandoned ship that was on the verge of exploding any minute now? She would then order a steady retreat once more, pulling the droids further in and past the Starlight, and once it was behind them, the ship would be quickly maneuvered into position before being rammed right into the core ship. Will that even work? An officer questioned as Jess shrugged her shoulders. Maybe it will or maybe it won't, but we have to do something. She answered as the others nodded. If that Lucrehulk could be destroyed, they could restabilize their part of the front line, pushing the enemy back. With that said, the plan was quickly set in motion. On board the Negotiator, I must say, Naruto's officers are quite effective. Obi-Wan commented as Yularen's hologram nodded. Allender was a well-respected man even before the Clone Wars, and that didn't change when the war began. His proficiency in starfighter tactics was so great Obi-Wan wondered if the man had experience with the Starfighter Corps. Sir, Admiral Yularen's forward line is breaking. An officer reported as Obi-Wan frowned at this. He had just lost a Star Destroyer, and others had been seriously damaged. This was not good news. Sir, with your permission I would like to recall our fighters from the surface to assist us. Yularen advised from the Resolute as Obi-Wan nodded. The Separatist fleet had pushed his back quite a bit, and most of it was due to not having enough fighters to counter the swarms of incoming bombers and fighters. Yes, you're right. I hope that Anakin doesn't need any more help. Kenobi commented. He would no longer be able to provide support without risking the fleet, and with that the last of the Republic's fighters were called back to space. As he observed the changing battlefield thanks to the aid of Ceres' squadron, he sighed in relief. While the flanks were somewhat pushed back, the center was holding strong, and was able to hold back the separatist onslaught. Admiral Hollander seems to have the situation under control on his part, and Admiral Mark is holding up the left quite well. Admiral Yularen was silenced as one of Ross's ships had begun ascending into a better position to defend Yularen's weakening line, staying just out of the effective range of Grievous's turbolasers. Ross and Weil had both saved the entire from Grievous's surprise attack in a matter of moments. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for now, Obi-Wan could breathe again. Then suddenly, a huge explosion rocked the ship. After the damage report was given as an all clear, Obi-Wan understood it wasn't a hit on his flagship, but it felt like some sort of shockwave had come from behind. On board the usurper, Grievous was growing more and more impatient by the second. His initial assault had proven to be effective, pushing the Republic fleets back. However, the center of the Republic lines proved to be difficult, and more so with those new ships expertly weaving into the collapsing lines from below to delay his advance further. The 11 Seconds commander had already called in the last of their destroyers in reserve, so Grievous spat out the order to draw back the advance, to prevent his own center from being completely wiped out. What's the situation with this delay, Captain? Their fleet isn't even half the size of ours. They should be debris by now. Grievous snapped with a loud growl, quickly getting tired of this drawn-out fight. He was supposed to crush the Republic fleet and lift the siege on Renvar, but instead he was encountering swift and decisive resistance with every move he made. Even though he was capable in naval combat, he was no expert. Sir, we've just lost one of our capital ships. The droid reported as Grievous' eyes slightly widened, turning his attention to the 11-second Soul Lucrehulk that was exploding violently. There was a whole army of droids on that ship, and now it was nothing more than floating space junk. What was that foolish woman doing allowing the Republic's rear line to take out one of their greatest assets? On board the Superior, the air on the bridge of the Superior was so dense one couldn't possibly cut it with a knife. Perhaps a lightsaber would do the trick, but nothing would stop the unrelenting fury radiating from their commander. She had done well on Geonosis, managing to amass a large group under her command and stall the Republic's advance in her direction. But ever since she had started doing battle with the 10th Army and their damned admiral, she had faced only humiliation and defeat. The red-eyed, blue-skinned Chiss general again felt that deep hatred, frowning as she witnessed the destruction of the 11th Fleet's last Lucrehulk, her Lucrehulk. General Tan, the Nimwadian captain, whimpered out, only continuing when he noticed the general's glare wasn't as intimidating as he first thought. Comscan indicates that all systems aboard the obstructor are not responding. The Vulture droids linked to his signal are beginning to shut down. The bit of courage he had found quickly faded as Tan pounded her fist onto a nearby control panel. This is unacceptable, she said to herself calmly. Her ploy had drawn in the Republic fleet, but why hadn't she and Grievous succeeded in trapping them wholly? That Admiral Darahan had held back his ships, managing to see through her ploy in time to prevent the encirclement. She needed to do something fast to claim victory against the Republic, or else this would be another failure that Dooku would not tolerate. She was still the leader of the Dark Acolytes, and she feared what fate awaited her, should she suffer another loss. Severance Tan had already been demoted once, she would not suffer that same humiliation a second time. On board the usurper, I have no idea what Count Dooku sees in that foolish woman. Grievous thought to himself, partially blinded to her capabilities by his own conceit. In the beginning, Tan had been Supreme Commander, not he. It was only due to Tan's failing to destroy the Fonter shipyards that Grievous had been given a chance at the position. The Chiss general argued that it was because Wat Tambur's tactical droid had fumbled miserably, but his failure was her failure according to Dooku. Grievous was torn out of his mental tirade by one of his Providence cruisers breaking in two and careening towards the planet's surface. The Republic had somehow managed to turn around the droid army's surprise counterattack and put them on the defensive, as Grievous found himself also pulling back his ships. Frustrated with this new development, Grievous smashed a nearby B-1 bridge operator and howled his next order with fury. Redirect bombers to bombard the enemy forces on ground. Grievous commanded with a certain degree of desperation in his voice. Having used the B-1 as an example, the droids quickly got to work avoiding the same fate. While this might seem an order given out of rage, it was a carefully calculated move. The Republic had withdrawn all air support, and their troops were still out in the open plains. Sending his bombers down would force the Republic fleet to send more fighters below, hampering their efforts in space, and allowing Grievous to continue his mad, relentless assault. Roger. Roger. The droids complied in a panic, sending commands to the droid bombers who quickly broke off from their original Venator target before diving down at an extreme angle, heading straight towards the planet. Grievous let out a brief cackle. With Anakin and Isla near the Force Shield generator, the two Jedi Knights had been making excellent and had began their advance towards the fourth generator, with elements of the 497th Legion as reinforcement bringing up the rear. Without Naruto's timely arrival, we would have suffered much heavier losses. It surprises me he's such a capable tactician. Usually one has to be smart for something like that. Ayla asked rhetorically, and Anakin only shook his head. Credit where credit was due, and with Naruto's foresight to alter their strategy had proven highly effective. The Republic had gone from barely hanging on to knocking on the door of the Separatists' headquarters. Not to mention when he destroyed the third generator, the primary focus of the droid army had shifted to Naruto's, allowing Anakin and Ayla to continue their advance to the next generator. Unfortunately, they had run into a heavily defended ledge that had complete control over the surrounding area. Let's hope that this Separatist fleet will be as easy for them to deal with as the first one, Anakin replied. If the Separatists were to lift the siege, then the ground forces would be in even greater danger. All the Separatists would have to do is land behind them and encircle them to finish them off, and Anakin wasn't in the mood for a months-long game of cat-and-mouse guerrilla warfare. Incoming. The clone shouted as he pointed above as droid bombers dropped their ordnances on the exposed AT-OT transports, completely obliterating them and killing the clones inside. However, that wasn't the last of their worries as TIE descended upon them as well, carrying out strafing runs at the exposed and disabled transports. What happened to our air support? Anakin questioned as he jumped out of his transport and underneath it to avoid the blaster fire. Many of the clones did the same as the transports pushed forward under heavy fire, and to make matters worse, the Separatists' fortress began to open up fire as well. This was some conundrum. Stay near the transports and get strafed by TIE or spread out and slowly fall to the long-range cannons, being attacked from above and the front. This is turning out to be a fine mess of a battle. Ayla commented as she deflected some blaster fire from the fortress. Anakin grunted as he too deflected incoming fire. They needed air support and they needed it fast, or else the entire Republic attack force would be wiped out. With Ross on the spearhead, the Separatists are attacking our surface troops by employing bombers, and now TIE fighters. I would move to assist, but I am a bit tied down. Tarkin spoke as his hologram faded slightly before reappearing. Ross frowned at this news. Tarkin was with Jess dealing with the 11th Fleet, and they were locked in a very heated battle. There was no way either of them could provide air support. I'll do what I can, for now focus on the droid fleet, Ross stated as Tarkin nodded before the transmission was cut. Taking a thinking pose, Ross thought of what to do. Their V-19s were. Have command of our victory cruisers transferred as followed. The Crusader to Zels, the Consternation to Tarkin, and the Aurora, Jess. Have all of the V-Nators under my command transferred to Allender. Ross ordered as everyone looked at him, confused. But, what about us, sir? The clone officer questioned. They couldn't deal with the remaining destroyers ahead of them alone. We will be providing surface aid to ground forces. The ships in range to follow us are already heavily damaged and will not, unless they plan to be destroyed. Ross reasoned as everyone nodded at that. The last wave of frigates that had jumped in to try and distract him had come out of hyperspace too close to the Republic fleet and were promptly dealt with. The counterattack had mostly been dealt with and, despite having the Republic having lost 5 V-Nators already, Grievous would most likely need to retreat if his gambit on the ground didn't pay off, which considering Ross had seen through the Cyborg's plan to draw V-19s back to the surface, and then ambush them with the TIE he also sent down. But an entire Star Destroyer would not fall victim to such a maneuver. Prepare the ship for atmospheric re-entry. As this mind-boggling order was received by the rest of the fleet, everyone had opened a holocom's line with him, fully believing the man had gone crazy. Ross, have you gone mad? No ship of that size can maintain altitude in a planet's atmosphere. The hologram of Allender appeared with a look that said it all. Well, the gravitational pull of a planet wasn't a problem for lighter and smaller ships like the CR-90 Corvette or even the Acclamator frigate. It was something one had to consider for bulk cruisers. They could take off and land from a planet's surface if absolutely necessary, but their greater weight meant that maintaining altitude often caused too much strain on their durasteel supports, and the front of the ship would eventually buckle after a few minutes of maintained altitude. So it was typical for any ship destroyer sized or above to stay in a planet's high orbit range and board dry docks for repairs, rather than risk breaking themselves in two. I agree with Allender. This is a foolish move. Between the pressure of the thrusters and its own weight, the ship is going to snap in two before it explodes into a spectacular fireball. You'll just get yourself killed. Jess's hologram appeared as well, and she did not look pleased. She had just started to push the droid fleet back on her part, and was told that she was giving the command of a new vessel, only to find out that the commander of the fleet had chosen to split his fleet, and had the stupid idea of taking the ship right on top of the Separatist fortress. My faithful companion, you're showing your age with that kind of outdated thinking. Have you forgotten that technology is always improving? That was all Ross said as the two fleet commanders rolled their eyes at that. The V-Nator was also a brand new ship, and they didn't have that capability. How could Rendili's star drive have come up with such a feature only a few months later? Had he finally gone mad with the power of these new ships? They had plenty of heavy cannons, but bigger wasn't always better. Do whatever you want, Ross. We have a fleet to fight. Hope your death is as painful as your plan is stupid. Jess stated as he cut the transmission. Let it be known that she tried to stop this foolish move. Allender opted to only shake his head. You kids are going to be the death of me. I hope your plan somehow works, Ross, but don't expect me to show up at your funeral. He commented as Ross let out a small chuckle at that. Truly, the old man was the grandfather of the whole sector army. As the ship began to feel the pull of gravity, the thrusters were sent into full reverse. His ship began to enter the planet's atmosphere at blinding speed, with fire starting to build up at the button, but the ship held strong as the shields and heat sinks got to work. Before they knew it, they had cleared the clouds and descended to low orbit. The Victory-class Star Destroyer was built to fill two roles that the Venator and Acclamator just couldn't fill. That of a heavy warship and low-orbit naval support. Ross grinned as the stupefied faces of Isla, Anakin, and their clones looked up in awe at the Admiral's display of force. Open all missile pods and target those bunkers. Prepare full salvo. Ross barked out in a slight rush. The bridge crew quickly began to follow through with their orders in a slight rush as well. In only a minute, the hidden side flaps of the Victory had opened up, revealing its substantial payload of explosive ordnance. Ross' next order was softly spoken, but carried with it the weight of a monarch. Wipe these pathetic droids off the face of this planet. And then, the icy skies of Renvar were filled with fire. With Deepa and the 108th Corps. Go? Deepa shouted as she charged forward, diving right into the line of droids, as the clones followed her lead. Currently, she was holding back a horde of droids at the West Ridge. The order had come down from Obi-Wan for her to launch an attack on the next generator just beyond the West Ridge. After receiving the news that Anakin's advance towards the fourth generator had been forestalled by the arrival of the Separatists' main army, Deepa had launched an attack that proved to be the folly of her battle group, as the Separatists had somehow managed to supply even more droids to the southwestern front. Deepa had taken notice of the massive warship, nearly a kilometer long, now hovering in low orbit above the planet. It would seem that the Victory cruiser had been designed for atmospheric combat. That didn't bode well for the Separatists. What made matters worse for them was the earth-shattering barrage of concussion missiles by the dozen. This new development had seemingly startled the droid's commander, and the hordes of metal had begun pulling back towards the defensive lines near the generator complex. Let's go crazy. Deepa sighed as she heard one of her clone commanders, Ballistic, once again literally go ballistic against the retreating. Ballistic was an odd clone, and the closest clone she could relate to him was Storm of the 497th, but even then it was stretching it. He thrived on the battlefield, full of adrenaline. He would tear though whatever foe that was presented to him with his twin light repeaters. She greatly appreciated his enthusiasm on a different level, though, as the droid army had almost completely encircled 3 of her legions against the West Ridge in their tactical retreat. Ballistic and his legion were holding a poorly placed line in the face of overwhelming odds with all their might. Push forward, she shouted, a second wind flowing across the battlefield as Deepa and her forces pushed the droids back. If they took the West Ridge for the Republic and destroyed the shield generator, Anakin's battle group would no longer be caught in a crossfire between the droids on Southeast Ridge and those she was facing. With Allender on the Sovereignty. I can't believe the son of a bitch did it. Allender was in awe of his view screen. The Separatists' forward position had been completely annihilated, leaving Anakin and Isla's army with little left to fight. It's likely the innovative design of the ship. Admiral Darahan was quite gutsy in choosing to attempt this tactic in a combat scenario. Tarkin weighed in. He was impressed by Ross's gumption and the capabilities of the new Star Destroyer variant. He would have to organize a meet with the Chancellor to share his own ideas for the Star Destroyer line. Still, that thing is going to get torn to shreds by their bombers and tri-fighters, and it looks like Grievous is sending even more fighters to stop him. Allender gestured towards the group of destroyers and frigates that Ross had evaded with his bold descent, and the swarm of vulture droids escorting them. He opened a comm channel to Ciri's squadron, and ordered her to head towards the planet's surface after the Separatists' second wave. It would be well worth it if Ciri and Ross could take out half a dozen Confederate support ships. That was when the captain of the Conquest again gave his 2 credits of advice. A wise move to send General Tachi, Admiral, but I feel that might be unnecessary. Allender furrowed his brow in confusion. Ross had descended to the surface without any fighters. Tarkin returned the look, but his was accompanied by a twinge of disappointment. Don't tell me you didn't notice Ross hasn't yet deployed his fighter complement. Tarkin also pointed out that none of the Victory cruisers had scrambled the new line of Income Corporation starfighters that were in their hangar bays. Lapeel and the rear guard. The scarred and stout Jedi Master frowned as he, along with his forces, pushed towards the newly overextended center of the Separatist lines. He was in shock after Ross had launched dozens of concussion missiles at the heavily defended Separatist emplacements. It was then that Ross debuted another feature of the new Victory cruiser. The ability to deploy modular outposts from low orbit. These bases allowed Anakin's forces to quickly and effectively set up a small encampment right in the middle of the vast snowy plains, giving them protection from the superior droid fortress and numerous waves of droids. Take a platoon of clones and attack the enemy's flank. Claw Company will then distract them while an attack from the right will begin a breakaway skirmish. Afterwards, the main body of the 68th Legion will move forward through the emerging gap in the droid lines. Wiz ordered as Peel took notice of the leader of Brain's company, which had transferred from the 497th after Geonosis, to take command of the entire 68th Tactical Legion. Truth to the company's name, Wiz was an uncanny strategist whose plans came together like magic. He was one of the few clones Naruto considered invaluable to the 10th Army, as Naruto himself was no strategist. He, along with Peel, Fox, and King, were capable commanders and tacticians, yes, but superior tactics alone often wouldn't win a battle. Wiz's strategies were often detailed down to single key fire teams performing precise and timely coordinated strikes. Are you sure that it is wise? Peel asked, probing to see what the clone's strategy was. The enemy's right flank is lacking in protection, so we must presume that it is a common bait and switch tactic to lure our forces in. By making it seem we are falling for their maneuver, the enemy will quickly shift forces from the front to the right to secure it. That is when your platoon will quickly push through the weakened right flank with a much larger force behind them. This will allow us to encircle the center and quickly crush it. Wiz explained while keeping his full attention to the battlefield. Peel nodded at that. Rather than a concentrated attack down center, Wiz was creating multiple points of attack, most of them feints with only a few true advances. These attacks would accumulate into a one single push to utterly break the droid lines, as if multiple cracks were exposed to water, breaking it from inside out. With Naruto's team, Naruto cursed as he dodged incoming fire. He, along with a few Jedis and clones, were able to destroy one of the shield generators, but in the process they had been discovered. Now they had to fight their way back to their front lines. Looking up, he saw one of the ships that Ross had brought providing as much air cover as it could, but even that was starting to work against them. The Separatists were sending more and more tri-fighters down to the surface, to use their heavy blasters to deal heavy casualties to the Republic. Ross's vessel probably can't take much more. The Separatists have already turned their heavy ground batteries against it. Fi stated as she pointed at some Separatist positions still protected by a shield generator. If Ross stayed here for too long his ship would begin to suffer damage, but instead, Ross had launched 24 of the new model starfighters from his hangar, and they began engaging the tri-fighters in a dogfight. Slowly but surely, the large six-winged heavy starfighters began to pull ahead, thanks to their rear gunners mowing down any droid fighters silly enough to try chasing after their shiny new Arc 170. Actually, I think it will be just fine. Naruto reassured his fellow Jedi, who glanced back at him curiously before returning to the thick of it. Think about it, those anti-air cannons are intended for dropships, transports, and light support craft. They're not meant to damage something as armored as even a regular Star Destroyer, and I've read up on the Victory class, they're even more tough than the Venators. Naruto explained his theory, and true enough, the Victory stood strong. Enough digressing, we have to refocus. We still have those droids to worry about. Naruto pointed out towards the vast ranks of B1 battle droids heading their way. We need air support over here. Sarah stated as she activated her two green sabers, and began to deflect the incoming fire. The other Jedi followed her example, each igniting their own green sabers. But Naruto ignored the droids, and instead scanned the skies above. As he did so, he saw a group of 4 tri-fighters engaging a lone 170. Closing his eyes, Naruto extended his hand towards the dogfight above, reaching out further with the force, before he suddenly jerking his hand downwards, pulling each of the fighters off the clone pilot's tail in one motion, sending them crashing into the hordes of steel in front of them. The pilot thanked his general by blasting another formation of droids into oblivion. Does that count as air support? Sarah wondered. Now let's show these droids how to fight. Naruto commented as he grabbed his new lightsaber. It was an electrum-plated one with the signature golden finish starting on the hilt and rising in 2 thick columns up to the emitter. Between the columns of gold, orange paint formed a spiral pattern along the hilt. As Naruto again activated his new lightsaber, the color was the darker side of blue compared to other blades. More like the color of blaster fire from a DC-15 rifle than your average lightsaber. Any lightsaber made with electrum was an expensive one to build, as the metal was rare to find. Within the Jedi Order, only Jedi Masters were allowed to use electrum in the construction of their elegant weapon. Letting out a war cry, Naruto charged right into the droids, cutting through them with extreme speed and ability. Dodge, deflect, cut, dodge. His thoughts were almost subconscious, guided by the Force as he carried out the motions as he downed countless droids who stood no chance against his superior speed. He was barely even showing up on their sensors. Even to his fellow Jedi his blazing fast form IV movements were hard to follow. Naruto kept up his assault for several minutes, when suddenly his eyes slightly widened as he flipped backwards, narrowly missing a pair of red lightsabers. Narrowing his eyes, he quickly jumped back a bit to make distance between him and the unknown enemy. However, when he got a look of his opponent's pale white skin, his eyes narrowed as he recompassed himself. "The Sag Ventress," Naruto said as his said opponent smirked warmly, a trait Naruto found annoying that the Dathomirian had no doubt picked up from her master. "If it isn't Master Uzumaki, I figured you would be here." Ventress commented as Naruto frowned. Her hair was no longer present on her head, leaving her bald with some tattoos along her eyes and lips. She was a Jedi Padawan to Kentucky Narak, a Jedi Knight that was stranded on Ratatak. Naruto had been sent there to retrieve the Jedi Knight, only to find that he had taken up a Padawan, and had chosen to stay on the planet to train the young Dathomirian girl. Your master must be disappointed to see how far you have fallen. Naruto commented, ready to engage in combat as Ventur's smirk slightly turned down into a frown. My master is dead, and soon you will be too. She replied, causing Naruto to sigh. So the loss of her master is potentially what caused her to fall. Now was not the time to think that, however. He turned his attention to Ventress once more as she too readied herself. She knew that her opponent was far more skilled and experienced. However, before she could engage Naruto, Sarah had stepped in her path and blocked the twin red blades with her green ones. We'll take care of her, Naruto. You go and meet up with the main force. Fi stated, her saber at the ready as Sarah strained against Ventress's fierce saberlock. Naruto looked at the two before nodding. Very well, but I want both of you to be alive, understood? Naruto demanded of them as the two smiled at that, knowing that such a decision was not an easy one for Naruto. Oh, don't worry, we'll make it out alive. You just focus on taking care of the generator. Sarah grunted as she pushed Ventress back. Naruto nodded again before he used the force to sprint towards the front lines. Ventress attempted to give chase but was once again blocked, this time by Fi. You are our opponent. Fi stated as Ventress scowled, before fixing her face into a sly grin. She would show these foolish Jedi that Sith were the better warriors. With Naruto was rapidly making progress in his mad dash to the western battlefront, cutting droid after droid and leaping across the battlefield, and it didn't take him long before he could finally see Republic forces in the distance from his position under the shadow of Ross's new flagship, sending out a large force shockwave, sending a large amount of droids flying back as he quickly made his way to the stalled Republic lines. It's the general. He heard a clone from the 497th shout out as the clones all looked towards him as he came running in. General. He looked around and saw King, along with Wiz walking up to him. Boy, aren't you sight for sore eyes. Naruto commented as the two clones chuckled at that. Fang had contacted them a few minutes ago, telling them the situation, and that they had separated from the general. Well, it's good to see you all doing well, but we got a long road ahead of us. King stated as Naruto nodded before he turned to Wiz. Where's Master Peel? Naruto questioned as Wiz stood at attention. Master Peel asked me to assist with the main assault while he brings up the center line. Wiz answered as Naruto raised an eyebrow. Master Peel was bringing up the rear guard in the last report, but it seems like he switched strategy, letting a much larger force break through the center and the main objective. Naruto. The said blonde Jedi raised an eyebrow as he heard a familiar voice call out his name, and sure enough there was Isla. Well, good to see that you're doing fine. Naruto commented with a chuckle as the female Jedi rolled her eyes at that. Even in the thick of it he was so carefree. I hate to interrupt, but we have a battle to attend to. Anakin stated as he approached the group, causing Naruto to nod. He's right, what's the situation? Naruto ordered, acting like the general he was. Wiz was the one who stepped forward and began the report. Sir, our forces have a shield generator in our sight south of our position just over the ridge. However, it is defended by two heavily manned lines of trench defense. The first line consists of a mix of light and heavy bunkers. Behind that is a second line where the heavy artillery and equipment is located. We need to break through the fight line in order to reach the second, Wiz explained as Naruto hummed. We need to punch through while the separatists are still off balance. Anakin reasoned as Naruto shook his head. While it might be effective, it would not be sound as of this moment. They might be confused, but those positions are no joke. We need to do what we do best, small-scaled attacks across their line and keep them on the back foot. Naruto stated as Wiz nodded. While attacking in smaller groups we can expose their weak points and use small, but large attack groups to push through. Wiz finished as Naruto nodded. Wiz, while his strategies were very similar, were quite effective, and he had yet to find an opponent that would force him to use different tactics, given how linear droid's strategies were, most of them anyways. Then what are we waiting for? Let's do this. Naruto shouted as he quickly took the field once more as King shook his head, but followed after his general. Wiz stayed behind, opting to coordinate the attacks to their maximum efficiency. You know, it's pretty rare to find a clone who doesn't choose to fight. Anakin commented as Wiz stopped and thought over that. True, clones were bred for war, they were made to fight. Every last single one of his brothers was able to fight effectively, even the officers. However, he liked the more game-like and strategic aspect of the battle. He enjoyed commanding his forces in the invisible battle between masterminds, and had it not been for Naruto, who had allowed such a talent to grow, he would have been just another clone. You'll find that much of the 497th and its migratory parts of the 10th Army are, what our creators called us, independent thinkers. If anyone's to blame for this outcome, it's the general. Not that I'm complaining. By giving his legion a free-flowing command structure, he has brought out the best in most of his troops. Myself being a good example. Wiz responded pridefully. The amount of freedom the 10th Army enjoyed was quite radical. They operated very differently than other sector armies. Perhaps that's what makes us the best. Wiz thought to himself. Yes, an army where soldiers were given more freedom and encouraged to act independent of one another, allowed for lower casualties in blood battles. Not like the separatists where every order was hardwired into your programming, and not like other clone legions where obedience was so highly prized. I see. Anakin merely responded. He would keep this knowledge in mind. Perhaps a similar structure in the 501st would yield superior results. Not that he had any problems with the way his legion operated, but why not improve where you can? With that thought in mind, Anakin headed to the front. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.